I tried to defend myself by bringing up my hands and arms to block her attacks, but she just kept coming at me until I punched her in the stomach. She was much smaller, and the blow from my fist made her double over in pain. Before I knew what had happened, she ran and told my father that I had attacked her without a reason, and when I tried to plead my case and say that she attacked me first. My father wouldn't believe me. Instead, he just demanded that I leave right away. Hi there, my name is Michael, and I've been placed in a really uncomfortable and terrible situation. It all started when I was 12. My parents were wonderful together. I honestly looked up to them as what a loving and caring couple should be, and I had hoped that someday that I would also be able to find someone that made me feel as special as they made each other feel. Both of them were incredibly romantic and did their best to make the other one feel loved and needed. So when my mother became ill with an incurable disease, my father and I were devastated. She went from being healthy to being on her deathbed within weeks, and there was nothing that we could do about it. The day that she died, my father and I spent a solid 24 hours crying. We only stopped because we passed out from exhaustion. After the funeral, my father and I tried our best to get back into a normal routine, but it was so hard not having my mom around. Things just felt like they were missing something vitally important. The years passed and my father and I healed, although we never truly forgot her. I had honestly thought that my father would have stayed single for the rest of his life, but I would have thought wrong. Not long after my 18th birthday, my father brought home a woman that was nearly half his age. My father had had me when he was only 22, and this woman that he brought home was 24. He introduced her to me as his girlfriend, and that her name was Carrie. It felt awkward that my father was dating someone that was barely older than me, but I didn't really see where it was my place to complain. So long as he was happy, then I would just have to stomach it. Besides, I had thought that Carrie would get tired of dating someone so much older, but I had suspected wrong. Months went by, and they were still dating, and what was worse, my father had invited her to move into our house. The day that she did, she began redecorating the house, and even started removing photos from the walls and furniture, including ones of my mom. Hey, you can't just take those photos down.
Hey, this is my house now too, and I don't want to see photos of your dead mother. I don't need reminders that I wasn't his first wife. After all, I have you here to remind me of that.
How dare you? There is no way that my father will stand for this. Sadly though, Carrie talked to my father first, and had spun the story that I was being rude, and that I hated that she was moving in. Sadly, my father believed her, and he asked me to try to be more nice to Carrie since she would now be living with us, and if we wanted a happy home, then we needed to get along. When I tried to bring up the fact that she had taken down the photos of my mother, my father got rather absent-minded and just said that maybe it was time that we did take them down. After all, she would have wanted us to move on with our lives, and no matter whether we had photos of her on the walls or not, we would never forget her. I wanted to believe what he was saying, but it sounded like a very lame excuse. Again, I just wanted him to be happy, plus I was planning to go away to college within a year, and so I resigned myself to just putting up with Carrie for what I thought would be a short amount of time. But then things began to escalate. For starters, Carrie and my father got married, and not long after that, she began to boss me around.
Hey, brat, I need you to wash my car.
What car? You don't own one.
Ha, joke's on you. I got your father to buy me one, and I got it dirty. So go clean it.
No. Why would I do that? I'm not your servant.
You'll do it, or I'll kick your ass.
She then attacked me and began to punch me in the face and stomach. I tried to defend myself by bringing up my hands and arms to block her attacks, but she just kept coming at me until I punched her in the stomach. She was much smaller, and the blow from my fist made her double over in pain. Before I knew what had happened, she ran and told my father that I had attacked her without a reason, and when I tried to plead my case and say that she attacked me first. My father wouldn't believe me. Instead, he just demanded that I leave right away. Even though I knew that I was in the right and that I hadn't done anything wrong, I couldn't persuade him to see the truth. Instead, I had to pack up my things and just leave. It was less than ideal, but it was either that or my father insisted that he would call the police, and that was something that I really didn't want to get involved with. And so I left and used what little money I had saved up working part-time to find myself a place to live. Unfortunately, it was a very small apartment in a very bad neighborhood, but it was all I could afford. It took some time, and I had to take out loans, but I did manage to still go to college. And after 4 years of studying extremely hard and working 3 part-time jobs at the same time, I graduated and was able to find an entry-level job at a prestigious law firm. It didn't pay much better than my part-time jobs, but it was a start, and I was grateful for it. A couple years passed, and I moved up in the firm and started making some pretty good money. So much so that I was able to buy myself a modest house in a much nicer neighborhood, and was even able to get myself a car too. And another few years passed, and I once again moved up in the company and was able to buy myself a really large house along with a luxury car. I was rather proud of myself, and unfortunately the only thing that could make it better was to know that my father was proud at how far I had come. But it had been many years since we had spoken, and I wasn't sure if he was still upset with me or not. One day though, I heard a knock on my front door and went to answer it, and was beyond surprised to see Carrie of all people standing there.
Hi, Michael. I know that it's been a long time. Can I come in?
I honestly didn't really want to let her in, of course, but I was hopeful that maybe she had grown over the years and that maybe she had come to apologize for driving a wedge between my father and I. Okay, I suppose.
So I heard that you had done quite well for yourself, and by the looks of it, you really have.
Yeah, it's taken a long time, but I'm doing well.
That's good. Sorry to ask, but can I use your washroom?
Annoyed, I showed her to my washroom, which was connected to my bedroom. As I showed her the way, she kept admiring my large house and all the things that I had amassed over the years. Once she was in the bathroom, I left her to go back to the living room to wait for her. 20 minutes passed when I finally got impatient and went to check on what was taking so long, and as I entered my bedroom, I found her naked on my bed. What the hell are you doing?
Oh, come on. I know that you've had a thing for me for years, and I'll be honest. Your father isn't really doing it for me anymore, so when I heard that you had become rich, I thought that I would come and pay you a visit. I can do all the things that used to make your father happy.
I was disgusted, and without thinking, I started recording our conversation using my cell phone that was hidden in my pocket. So you would leave my father for me? Just like that?
Well, of course I would. He's old and frail, and you're young and full of life. I'd much rather have a man like you.
Is that so? But why? Isn't my father doing okay for himself?
Well, he doesn't make the kind of money that you do, so I would much rather be with you.
With a big smile on my face, I pulled out my phone and showed her that I had been recording our conversation the entire time. The look of fear that spread across her face once she realized what I had been doing was priceless. Before she could say another word, I sent a copy of the recording to my father. In a flash, she ran past me and out of my house, and hadn't even bothered to get dressed. That night, I slept like a log, knowing that I had finally gotten a little bit of revenge against Carrie, and in the morning, I was greeted by a reply message from my father that read, "Can we talk?" My heart skipped a beat, and I wanted to think that maybe this meant something good, but after what had happened with Carrie the night before, I wasn't so sure that I should get my hopes up. I replied that I would be on my way over. When I arrived, my father met me at the front door and hugged me for a full 10 minutes. Neither of us spoke, and just enjoyed the hug after being apart for so many years. It felt incredible, but only half as good as what my father said next.
Oh, Michael, I was such a fool for believing Carrie. Can you ever find it in your heart to forgive me?
It's going to be hard, but I think with time that I can, yes.
That's more than I deserve, and I understand. I'm really proud at the man that you've become in spite of not having any help from an old fool like me.
Thanks, Dad. You taught me well, and I used the lessons from you to succeed. You know this is all well and good, but what about when Carrie comes home? The second I mentioned her name, my father began laughing hysterically. As it turned out, she had ran out straight to her car and had driven out of my driveway so fast that she hadn't paid attention to traffic and had backed out and into a cop car and then drove off in a panic. The cop pursued her for over 10 minutes until she finally noticed him and pulled over. After the cop looked in the window and saw that she was naked, he arrested her on the spot, and she spent the night in jail. Once he had told me the whole story, I asked him how he had found out all of this, and he told me that Carrie had told him. She had used her one phone call to call him and told him everything. So does that mean that you bailed her out?
Of course not. I had suspected that she had been cheating on me for years. but I could never prove it. A part of our prenuptial agreement stated that if either of us cheated, that the other would get nothing in the divorce settlement. And since you sent me proof, well, I can finally divorce her without the fear of her taking all my money in alimony.
And he was right. A few months later, my father successfully divorced Carrie, and the judge honored the prenuptial agreement, and Carrie got nothing. My father got the house, the car, and was able to keep his retirement savings as well, which left Carrie Penny less and homeless. In the months and years that followed, my father and I started spending a lot more time together in an attempt to make up for lost time. And I'm happy to say that we are once again very close and talk to each other almost every day. As for Carrie, well, she ended up going to prison for a few years for her little joyride where she evaded the police. After she got out, she really didn't have any good prospects, and as far as I know, she ended up living on the streets. I did feel bad for her, but only just a little. After all, she had stolen the most precious thing in the world from me: time with my father.
Bella, get over here right now.
What is it, ma'am?
I just used the upstairs bathroom and it's dirty, so get up there and clean it.
That's gross. Why don't you clean it yourself?
Because I'm too old, and Joe shouldn't have to clean it. After all, he is the breadwinner.
Well, hello there. My name is Bella, and I am 26 years old. A while ago, I got married to a man named Joe, but things didn't turn out to be the dream I had always wanted it to be. More specifically, my mother-in-law was an absolute nightmare, and so was Joe. But let me start from the beginning. We met while we were both vacationing in Paris. We actually met right under the Eiffel Tower, if you can believe it. I was sad at first, because I thought that he was from France, but it turned out he lived only a few towns over from me. When we found this out, we quickly began dating. On our first date, I opened up to him about how I was unable to find a job after college, and that I had been working at a pet store in the meantime. This was something I was very insecure about because I always wanted to make a lot of money. He assured me that it was nothing to be ashamed about and told me that he was actually a doctor. I couldn't believe I was dating a doctor. He was so dreamy and we had so much in common, especially our love for animals. He said he almost became a veterinarian, but his father was very strict growing up and demanded that he become a medical doctor, not just a doctor for animals. Me and Joe continued to date for months, and I began to realize that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I know it might not be customary, but I was actually the one to propose to Joe. I just loved him so much, and I wanted to start our family. Luckily, he said yes, and we began to plan our wedding. The first time I met my awful mother-in-law was at our wedding, and she made a comment to me that I'll never forget.
You're the bride? Are you serious?
Yep, I'm Bella. Is something wrong?
This is disappointing. I thought you would at least be beautiful.
Mother, be nice. This is my wife now.
Joe later explained to me why his mother had acted so inappropriate. He told me how, as she was getting older, she was losing her memory and becoming a mean old woman. He told me that I wouldn't have to deal with her very often because she lives so far away. We enjoyed the rest of our wedding, and my family loved Joe. A couple of months later, Joe got some bad news. He learned that his mother's house had burned down and that she needed a place to stay.
Baby, I'm going to offer to have my mother move in with us.
Well, I hope she will be nice to me. Is there anywhere else she can go?
She's my mother, Bella. It is my duty as her son to take care of her.
I guess you're right. Even though I hated the idea of his mother living with us, I bit my tongue. When Joe's mom was finally moved in, she immediately started causing problems. For one, she used all the hot water while she was showering and completely disregarded the fact that I needed some. Then she began eating all of the food in our house and would demand that I go and get more for her. This I could deal with, but then things began getting even worse.
Bella, get over here right now.
What is it, ma'am?
I just used the upstairs bathroom and it's dirty, so get up there and clean it.
That's gross. Why don't you clean it yourself?
Because I'm too old, and Joe shouldn't have to clean it. After all, he is the breadwinner. What do you do if you don't cook and clean? You make no money, you're just a lousy pet store worker.
Joe's mom's words cut deep, but still she had a point, and I went upstairs to clean the toilet. The next day, things got even worse when I went into work. My boss approached me and told me he needed to talk to me.
Bella, I have some bad news. We have some budget cuts, and you're fired. I'm really sorry about this, but there's nothing I can do.
I ran home crying after I heard this, because now I really had nothing. Joe was the one making all the money, and now I would just have to stay home and take care of his horrid mother. When I got home, I was reminded of what I would have to be dealing with.
Why are you home so early?
I got fired.
Wow, so you really are a loser, aren't you? I knew you weren't going to be good enough for my son. Now be a good wife and start cleaning.
It felt like my life was falling apart. I spent the whole day cleaning and waiting on my mother-in-law, listening to her barking orders and sharp insults. That night, I researched ways I could possibly make money online, and I finally came across freelance writing. I was always good at writing in school, and I decided I would give it a try. I made an account and quickly got my first orders, and after that, orders were coming in at an amazing rate. Safe to say, my mother-in-law was not a fan of this new job.
What are you doing? Why aren't you making me a sandwich, you ugly loser?
Don't talk to me like that. I'm working and I'm actually making great money, so leave me alone.
If you don't get in the kitchen and start cooking or cleaning, I will be telling Joe you haven't been a good wife.
Go ahead. I don't care what you say anymore. I was sure Joe would understand that what his mother told him wouldn't be true, but I would be mistaken. When Joe got home, he had an angry look on his face, and he told me his mother had called him and told him that instead of cleaning and taking care of her, I was working.
Why aren't you taking care of my mother? Isn't that what you're for?
Excuse me? I'm your wife. You're supposed to love me. Besides, I'm making a lot of money freelance writing, almost as much as you now.
Yay, right. And sure, I love you, but only if you do exactly what I say and take care of my mother.
Well, if that's the way it's going to be, then I don't want to be married to you anymore.
Good. Let's get a divorce then. You're no good anyway. Plus, I've been cheating on you since the day after we got married.
I couldn't believe Joe had deceived me this whole time, and he had turned out to be a completely different person. Although I was sad my marriage was falling apart, my career was going great. The next day, I was contacted by a Hollywood agent who hired me to write a movie starring some of the biggest names in the film industry. I wrote the best movie Hollywood has ever seen, and just like that, I was making millions of dollars, far more than Joe ever had. Nope.
Where are you getting all this money? Did you steal it?
Nope, I earned it. Now where are those divorce papers? It's time I get rid of you and Joe for good.
They're right here. But wait. Now that you're rich and famous, I changed my mind. I want to stay together, I'll stop cheating on you, and I'll kick my mother out.
Absolutely not. I'm on to bigger and better things now. I guess you just couldn't handle me being the breadwinner, you just had to go and ruin everything. I signed the divorce papers and kicked both Joe and his mother out, because since the house was bought in my name, I technically owned it, which Joe was furious about. Things finally felt at peace with those two finally out of my life. I was getting offers left and right to write more award-winning movies, and I was making more money than I knew what to do with. Just then, there was banging on my door. I went over to the door and almost fainted at what I saw. It was Joe and his mother standing outside of my door with a gun. They were demanding that I let them back in and that I supply them with $1 million. I learned later on that Joe and his mother had moved out and got a place together, but quickly started spending irresponsibly. Joe had picked up a habit of gambling, and his mother bought tons of expensive jewelry, which left them broke. Joe still had access to my bank account for some reason, and showed his mother all of the money I had been making, which gave her this evil idea to rob me. I had to think quickly, so I came up with a lie. I told them that the door was stuck, and that I'd let them in once I go get a tool to fix it. I quickly called the police and begged them to come quickly. It only took a few minutes for the police to arrive, and see Joe and his mother threatening me with a gun. They quickly handcuffed them, and only then did I feel safe enough to open the door. How dare you guys try to pull a stunt like this?
You don't deserve that kind of money. We do.
She's right. A woman's place is in the kitchen.
Look how low you've fallen, Joe. It's embarrassing. Have fun in prison. I saw later in the news that Joe was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and his mother was sentenced to 8 years as well. Joe begged me to bail him out of jail with all of my newfound wealth, but I refused. I even heard from one of my friends that works in the prison that Joe's cellmate is extremely aggressive and beats him up every night. As for his mother, well, she had to take up a job of cooking and cleaning in prison. just to get a little money so she could spend it on cigarettes. I even heard that Joe had his doctorates revoked so that even when he is released, he will never be able to be a doctor again. Personally, I think he and his mother both deserve it. What do you think?
The worst of it happened shortly after I turned 18.
After you wash the car, I want you to go and get me cigarettes and wine from the store. And hurry back because I need you to paint the fence later as well.
But I need to study for my exams, Angela. I don't have time for all of that.
You will do what you are told, Mac. I'm your mother. You will listen to me and do exactly what I tell you to do.
No, you're not. You and my father aren't even married. She didn't even hesitate to reach back and slap me. It hurt so much and made me see stars. And although I wanted nothing more than to slap her back, Hi there, my name is Mac. I know. It's not the most clever name in the world, but what can I say? I wasn't the one that originally picked it. Personally, I think my father had picked it out because he had a great sense of humor and was a huge fan of macaroni and cheese. And considering how much my mother loved him, and often she joined him in his pranks and jokes, I can only guess that my mom liked the name as well and allowed him to give it to me. Growing up, our house was always filled with laughter, either from the telling of jokes or from harmless pranks that we would pull on each other. I never had any siblings, but I didn't mind. We were a happy small family, and I honestly thought that we would be together forever. But fate had a different idea. I will never forget the day that my mom came home crying. It took my father and I several hours to calm her down, and once we did, she shared the terrible news with us. She had just come from the doctor and had been given the news that she had an inoperable brain tumor and that she would be lucky if she lived a full year. My father and I were deadly silent as we tried to process what we had just been told. That year, though, my father made it his personal mission to make sure that my mother's last year was filled with as many good laughs as possible. But sadly, she did pass away, and we were devastated. It took years of therapy before we finally began to feel something even close to being happy. The first time that my father left a whoopee cushion on my chair, I felt more relieved than annoyed. It meant that we were truly healed and feeling like ourselves again. My mother would never be forgotten, of course, but we had finally gotten to a place where the pain wasn't overwhelming. As the years passed, my father did date from time to time, but it was never anything serious. That is, until he brought home Angela. Angela was something altogether different. She had no sense of humor at all and would get extremely angry whenever my father would pull an innocent prank or tell a joke. Personally, I didn't understand what my father ever saw in her, but he promised me that he was happy, but I often wondered if he actually was. On top of that, Angela had a daughter, Jessica, who was incredibly obnoxious.
Mac, you're such an idiot.
Wait, what? What did I do?
You were born, and that's more than enough. When are you going to move out, you freeloader?
She was constantly saying things like that, and it never made any sense, especially since I was only 15 at the time, and her mom had moved into our home, and as far as I was concerned, they were the freeloaders. It honestly felt like they were only living with us so that they could get my father's money. As annoying as Jessica was, sadly, Angela was no better. She constantly would force me to do chores, which I didn't mind as I always had chores that I was responsible for, but Angela always made me do more than what was fair. And she never made Jessica do anything. She only ever thought it was my duty. Dad, can you please talk to Angela? She constantly makes me do everything around here and never makes Jessica help. I know, Mac. I've spoken to her before. Just keep doing your best. I honestly couldn't understand why he wouldn't help me, but things would only get worse. The older I got, the more that Angela would demand of me. The worst of it happened shortly after I turned 18.
After you wash the car, I want you to go and get me cigarettes and wine from the store. And hurry back because I need you to paint the fence later as well.
But I need to study for my exams, Angela. I don't have time for all of that.
You will do what you are told, Mac. I'm your mother. You will listen to me and do exactly what I tell you to do.
No, you're not. You and my father aren't even married. She didn't even hesitate to reach back and slap me. It hurt so much and made me see stars. And although I wanted nothing more than to slap her back, I held myself in check and forced my anger away. I knew that giving in to the rage that I was feeling would do me no good. Instead, I just stared daggers at her and walked away. The first chance I got, I went and talked to my father, but I hadn't been quick enough. "Hey, Dad, listen. We need to talk about Angela." She told me about what happened. "Dad, please, you need to listen to me." No, Mac. Please, this isn't working out. You're 18 now, and you are more than able to live on your own. I know it's going to be hard, but I need you to move out. I'll help you out with bills, but I need to focus on Angela and Jessica. And unfortunately, with you here, I can't. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father was kicking me out. Sure, he promised me that he would still help me out. But to be forced out of my own home just to make some freeloaders feel welcome was so incredibly annoying. True to his word, though, my father did help me find a place to live and helped me with my bills until I was able to get myself a part-time job that allowed me to go to school at the same time. Even with my part-time job, my father still insisted on giving me money to help me out. It didn't hurt that my mother had left my father and I a very large life insurance policy that helped us live very comfortably. It still stung knowing that I couldn't go home, but my father still visited me and cared for me, but it always felt like it was from a distance. After a few years, I graduated from school and started working for a tech firm as a programming engineer. The pay was wonderful, and the work felt so rewarding. I was able to upgrade my small one-bedroom apartment to a 3-bedroom house. It wasn't anything special, but it felt like a palace to me. My father even came over to help me celebrate the buying of my first house. I had lived there for many years when my father came over one night. His eyes were incredibly bloodshot, and it was obvious that he had been crying. After a few tense minutes, he finally began to speak, and he told me that much like my mother, that he had a brain tumor and that he didn't have that much time left to live. Once again, I was devastated, and I wanted nothing more than to make sure that his last months were filled with laughter and love. Even though it was uncomfortable, I asked him if I could move back home with him temporarily to help him, and so that I could spend as much time with him as possible. After a few minutes, he agreed, and soon afterwards, I moved into my old bedroom. As it turned out, Jessica still lived at home, and not only did she not work, but she spent all day on the couch watching television and doing nothing else. Angela wasted no time, though, and instantly approached me as soon as my suitcase was unpacked.
I don't know why your father would allow you to come back and live here.
Relax, Angela. It's temporary. I'm only here to help my father. He is going through something right now, and he needs me to be here, and I also need to be here for him.
Well, thankfully it's only temporary, but don't think that you'll get to stay here for free. And don't get any ideas in your head about trying to weasel your way back into the will. Your father cut you out when you left, and you'll be lucky if he lets you pay for the funeral when he dies.
True to her word, she demanded that I pay rent while I was staying there and gave me a laundry list of chores to do. As a way to keep the peace, I chose to do them and to pay the rent and keep it a secret from my dad. I wanted more than anything to make sure that my father's last days were as stress-free as possible. Even though it made all the rage that I used to feel about her come boiling back up to the surface when she mentioned my father's will, I chose to ignore it and just try to be a good son. After all, I really didn't care about inheriting anything. I just wanted to spend time with my father, especially since his days were numbered. As my father began to get sicker, and it was obvious that he wasn't long for this world, he gave me a sealed envelope and told me that I needed to read it in private. He told me that it would be his last prank and that it would be a killer one. After he gave it to me, he began to laugh, and after a few moments he smiled, and then he passed away. After reading the letter, I knew that my father would indeed get the last laugh. A few days later, we held a funeral for him, and it went fairly smoothly. Both Angela and Jessica were almost celebrating, as I knew that they assumed that they had just inherited a large fortune, but they hadn't read the letter that my father had given me, and they didn't know the truth. But I kept what I had learned to myself, and just waited. And sure enough, a few days after the funeral, we met with my father's lawyer so that he could read the will. Angela and Jessica were smiling and excited to learn how much they were going to get. Meanwhile, I was debating whether or not to record the reading of the will so that I could enjoy their expressions later, and decided against it. You see, the letter detailed how my father had found out that Angela had cheated on him more than once during the time that they were together. It was true that they never actually got married, but he had always assumed that they were a monogamous couple and was horrified to find out how many times she had betrayed his trust. As for Jessica, she was cut from the same cloth as her mother, and had always treated my father poorly and had never made an attempt to bond with him. It was rather sad, as they were the ones that he spent most of his time with. He was very apologetic of that fact and had promised me that he would be leaving his entire inheritance, as well as his home, to me, as a way of apologizing for all the lost time that we had missed out on. Slowly, the lawyer read the will, and as he read out what my father had decided in the letter that he had written to me, I got to see the looks of shock on Angela's and Jessica's faces. They were left nothing but the bill for my father's funeral, while he left me everything of value. It felt so cathartic to hear that my father had finally stood up for me against them. In the weeks that passed afterwards, I was forced to get the police to help me kick both of them out of my new home, as they refused to leave. Jessica even tried to seduce me and make me think that she was the perfect wife for me, which was beyond disgusting. How she thought that I would be attracted to her was beyond me. But eventually, they were forced out, and the last that I heard of them, they moved in with Angela's father in a small apartment in a very terrible neighborhood. The three of them are miserable and live off of Angela's father's pension, which barely covers their bills. As for me, I did end up selling my smaller home. It had been wonderful living there, but I fell in love with the idea of living in the home where I had so many memories of both my mother and father, and it felt like true justice to finally be able to call it home again. Maybe I'll be lucky and find someone to share it with and make some more happy memories here.
Max managed to get himself a job as a guard and only worked night shifts. However, he had only been free for about half a year when his new girlfriend that he had after being let out reported him to the police for stealing from her. He had apparently made copies of her credit cards and had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from her, which got him arrested again. He will be serving another 10 years for fraud as a result. It all started after my husband and I got a divorce. I was working on my undergrad degree and not employed at the time, focusing all of my time on my studies. I quickly found myself in a situation where I desperately needed help. That's when I moved in with my brother Max and his wife Martha. It wasn't the best situation, but at least I didn't have to worry about much other than finishing my degree. It was only a couple of months staying with them that I got the opportunity of a lifetime at the local government office as a paid intern. The job even included grant money to cover my college expenses. Pretty soon I was making great money and happy to help out. Apparently that wasn't good enough. One day at work, I decided to treat myself with a nice lunch at the sushi bar across the street.
That will be $24, cash or card.
Well, I don't think I have that much in cash, so I'll run it as credit, please.
Very well. Insert or swipe your card when you are ready.
I think nothing of it as I insert my card. That is until it starts beeping.
I'm sorry, miss, but your card was declined. Will that be cash then?
Unfortunately not. I know that I only have about $10 cash. I do apologize, but I'll have to cancel my order. So here I was, hungry and irritated. I stomped back across the street, hands deep within my pockets. I had spent my entire lunch hour trying to get a good bite of food. It just didn't add up at all. How could the card be declined? Luckily, the rest of my shift flew by without issue, and I couldn't have been any happier to see the clock strike 5 p.m. That night, I ignored both my brother and his wife and went straight to my room and opened my laptop. After logging into my bank website, I started to notice charges that didn't make any sense. There was a charge for yoga lessons. I certainly don't have time for those. Another for car accessories. I don't have a car either. These charges had to be at least $50,000. I was outraged. I had noticed that Max's Mustang seemed to be looking nicer, and all of a sudden Martha was heading off in the middle of the afternoon a few days a week. Luckily, I was able to extend my line of credit by $1,000.
Martha, isn't the concert you want to go to in a couple of weeks?
You're right, Max. I had almost forgotten about that. If we go, though, we'll need to get the car ready for such a long trip. We will also need to get new clothes and a hotel for a couple of days.
You're right, my dear. We will just have to borrow the money from my sister. We both know she's way too busy with work to notice anything anyway.
Martha thought she was being sneaky and apparently assumed I was asleep that night. She snuck into my bedroom and decided to borrow my card once more. Little did she know that I had caught her doing this more than once. I continued to go about things as if nothing had happened. Little did they know, I had a plan. It's a really good thing that I wasn't interested in seeing that band with them. I checked my credit card account every evening after work, and I watched the credit line keep getting closer and closer to maxed. About a week later, it was time for their trip.
Bye, sis. Have fun at work, and please don't make this place a disaster zone while we're gone. Also, I need you to catch up on the laundry and dishes while we're gone.
Oh, and also, I think the dog decided to chew up your work shoes, so yeah, ciao.
Their trip was taking them to the other side of the country, and Max's car didn't get the best gas mileage. It wouldn't be long before trouble started to present itself. About 4 hours into the trip, I got the phone call I was waiting for. In the meantime, I had made sure to get the chores finished that they had so politely asked me to do.
Hey, sis. I hope I'm not keeping you from anything. I need your help. Yeah, we ran out of gas and, the card isn't working. It keeps getting declined. We don't have any cash either.
Are you talking about my card? The one that you keep stealing money from me with?
I have no idea what you are talking about. How could you actually accuse your own brother, your own flesh and blood, from stealing from you?
Don't play dumb, little brother. You assumed that I was way too busy with my work and schooling to notice your lovely wife coming in at night and snatching my card?
You're being absurd. Martha would never do something like that. You know me, I would never do you wrong. Hell, we allowed you into our home because you were in a bad place. If anything, you owe us that money.
So you admit it then. You just admitted to stealing from me. I could hear Max stammering, trying to find a way to cover his tracks, and I could also hear Martha screaming at him to fix things. Before long, she decided she was going to take the phone from him.
Listen here, you ungrateful little brat. This is all your fault, and you are going to fix this, or else I want you out of our home by the time we get home. Do I make myself clear?
Oh, don't worry, sis. I read you loud and clear. I'll be out by the time you get back, and those chores are finished, by the way. Have fun figuring it out. I felt like a giant weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. I had already made arrangements and signed for an apartment closer to the government office. It didn't take long to pack up what few things I had, and I left their home with a smile on my face. Not to my surprise, I got about a block down the street when my phone started ringing again. I decided to ignore it the first few times, but it quickly got out of hand. Yes?
Hey, it's me again. I'm really sorry about what Martha said.
I'm sure you love having me there when I'm constantly cleaning up after you two and your disgusting dog. I don't think so. I've already left and I won't be coming back either.
We're literally stranded in the middle of nowhere, and your card won't work. Surely you can find it in your heart to help. I promise. You'll never have to do any more housework. You won't even have to help with the bills.
Do me a favor, pull the card out of your pocket and flip it over. Look at the name on it. I can hear Max shuffling around in his windbreaker pocket to find it. Then I can hear him let out a very displeased grunt.
What? You switched your card out with mine? You know that I overdrew that account years ago and just didn't get around to throwing it out. How could you?
Maybe you should have thought about that before deciding to help yourself to my credit. I hung up the phone and turned it off as I walked the rest of the way to my new apartment. Without furniture, it seemed a bit bare, but the feeling of being completely free and on my own more than made up for it. Within a month and clever bargain hunting, I had turned that apartment into my own little slice of paradise that I wouldn't trade for the world. As for Max and Martha, it seems as if they had to resort to selling the Mustang after a couple of days to be able to eat. I know that was hard on my brother because he loved that car more than he did anything else. They didn't even get enough out of it to repay the debt he owed me for the accessories. It wasn't even enough to get them back home. I found this out when I turned my phone on a couple days after they left, and I listened to all of the threatening voicemails left. The cops also felt them to be threatening and gladly decided to give them a ride home. Well, at least to the jail. I was able to get the credit card company to reverse the charges by proving that I was at work or school during the time the purchases were made. They also helped me file a separate lawsuit against the couple to cover my costs. While Max and Martha are in jail, Martha filed for and was granted a divorce. After Martha was released, a good friend of mine said that they saw her working at the local gas station and scraping by to pay off her fines and debt to me. Max managed to get himself a job as a guard and only worked night shifts. However, he had only been free for about half a year when his new girlfriend that he had after being let out reported him to the police for stealing from her. He had apparently made copies of her credit cards and had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from her, which got him arrested again. He will be serving another 10 years for fraud as a result. And I have since graduated and have excelled with my internship, that I have a permanent position and a very nice salary. I have even adopted the cutest pup that I have ever laid my eyes on. It may take 25 years before I get repaid for the debt owed to me, but it seems that my brother and his now ex-wife will be dealing with the consequences for the rest of their lives. Also, I hunted down Max's Mustang and paid the man twice what he bought it for. It's now my daily driver and I love it, except for long drives. It still doesn't get good fuel mileage. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. That's when the teenager kicked the police and tried to run towards me to attack me, but thankfully I had pepper spray in my purse and I pulled it out and sprayed him in the face. Hey, I'm Amelia, and I have a story to share with you all about this boastful teenager who thought he could get away with being a dangerous driver. It's a really funny story of mine. So I had recently had some big changes in my life. The first of which was the birth of my daughter, which was only about 2 months before this incident happened. Plus, I had literally just gotten a new car. So anyway, I was just driving down this street that was quite crowded. No matter the time of day, there were always cars on it. But it was rush hour at the time of the accident, which meant that it was even more crowded than usual. I was driving with the flow of traffic, which was close to the speed limit, because my daughter was in the back seat, and I didn't want anything to happen to her. Traffic came to a standstill, and I slowed down and stopped, and that's when it happened. We both lurched forward as someone rear-ended my car. My baby started wailing from the sudden impact, and I immediately steered my car over and onto the shoulder of the road, so I would be out of traffic so that I could safely go and check on her and make sure that she was okay. The car behind us drove around my car and stopped right in front of it. It was almost as if the people inside were taunting me just by staying there. The car who had hit us was a sports car, and it had these dark windows. I couldn't tell who the driver was, but the vehicle was blasting loud music with a lot of heavy bass, so I could only assume the driver was a young person. I quickly ran to the rear door and opened, and was relieved that she was okay. I spent a few minutes soothing her, and when I was convinced that she wasn't hurt, I left her safe and inside the car. I then walked up to the other car before they could drive off, and I tapped on the window quite angrily. When the window rolled down, I was met with the smug face of this teenager. He had a lot of jewelry on, and he had a bunch of his loud friends screaming in the back seat. I was annoyed and decided to tell him off for hitting my car. Hey, are you listening?
What?
You just hit my car with my newborn inside it.
So?
You could potentially cause her some damage to the head. You should know better before hitting people's cars, too. Let me call your parents. The teenager started laughing and bragging about how his parents would never believe a word that I was saying. And I started explaining to him that I was going to call the police if he didn't do as I asked and let me talk to his parents.
Ha! You're such a Karen. I'm sure your stupid baby will be fine. Tommy, isn't this lady kind of crazy right now?
Yeah, she's talking crazy. Maybe we should report her for harassing us. We're just teenagers trying to get home.
Hear that, lady? Get out of here before we tell everyone that you're assaulting us.
I'm not doing this today. Give me your mom's number so I can call her. Now.
Jeez. Now she's just trying to steal my phone. What a weirdo.
I was so pissed off and I didn't know what to do. One of the teenager's friends had his phone ready to record, so I knew that I had to act very carefully or else I'd be in a lot of trouble. I went back to my car and called the police. I explained the situation and they said that they'd send an officer. The driver and his friend came out and started taunting me again by making faces, and I groaned in annoyance. After the call, I walked to the kid's car and stood there until the police came to make sure that they couldn't drive off while I waited. Soon enough, a police officer showed up. I explained the situation to him again, and the teenagers began to lie.
So, I hear that you boys hit this woman's car?
She's insane. She's the one who stopped in the middle of the road, and it caused us to hit her.
That's not what happened.
Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Yeah, then she tried driving off like it was nothing, so we had to come around and block her from leaving. Is that so? Do either of you have insurance?
I'll call my dad and check.
Ma'am, I don't tolerate lying. I know nobody wants to be responsible and have to pay for someone else's damages, but you really were going to expect these teenagers to pay for your car repairs when you were the one at fault?
Sir, I'm serious when I say they're the ones who rear-ended me and tried leaving. My infant daughter is still in the back of my car and the impact was strong.
Should we call for medical assistance?
I think it's safer to do that.
But you understand you're still not getting away with putting the blame on those boys, correct?
It really wasn't me.
Tell that to the judge.
I was running out of time, and I knew that the police had more evidence in support of the teenager, and I really didn't know what to do. At this point, some pedestrians on the sidewalk had started to take videos of me arguing with the teenagers. I knew they were putting me online as some sort of Karen and that nobody would believe me. Just then, I had the realization that my dash cam was recording, like it always does. I quickly told this to the officer, who allowed me to go and retrieve what had just happened prior to the police arriving. I got what I needed and went back to the officer. He played back the recording, and he did see the teenagers laughing and making fun of me through the dash cam. After watching the video back again, he got suspicious.
Hey buddy, can I ask you to do some field sobriety tests for me?
Why? She's the one who hit us.
So you want to get taken to jail now? Or do you want to prove you're sober?
Fine, I'll do it.
I watched as the officer had the teenager walk in a straight line and stand on one leg. He failed the tests. He also blew into a breathalyzer, and it proved that he had been driving under the influence.
You're under arrest for drinking and driving.
That's when the teenager kicked the police and tried to run towards me to attack me, but thankfully I had pepper spray in my purse and I pulled it out and sprayed him in the face. He screamed out in agony and they tried to get back into his car to run, despite not being able to see. However, another officer had showed up just in time and tasered him. He yelped loudly again and fell to the ground writhing in pain. Both officers jumped on him and subdued him so that they could handcuff him. All that time, he tried to fight back by wiggling and trying to get free from them. After a few minutes, a large police van showed up and all of the teenagers were taken away in it. According to the police report, the driver had asked for his one phone call and had used it to call his parents to get them to help him out. However, they were so angry at him that they refused to bail him out or even give him money for a lawyer. The boy was in jail overnight and charged with a DUI, battery of an officer, assault towards me, and for resisting arrest. Despite that, he had not actually hit me. He had tried to, and that was enough for the report. However, once my adrenaline wore off, I began to notice how much pain I was in. I had been so concerned about my daughter and with the teenagers running off that I had ignored the fact that both my back and neck were in agony. Once I had told the police on the scene about this, they called an ambulance for me and took me and my daughter to the hospital. When we were there, they took x-rays and found out that my spine had been damaged and I had whiplash. The pain was so intense and it took months before I finally was able to act the same way that I normally did. I wasn't even able to carry my own daughter around at that time. I was so angry that I contacted a lawyer and had them sue the teenager and his parents. Thankfully, the judge had agreed that they should pay for my medical bills and for my pain and suffering. His parents refused to pay his bills though, and so he was forced to use his insurance to pay for all the damages he had caused my car and also for the medical attention my daughter and I received. My lawyers also pulled the tape from the traffic lights, and it was proven on video that the teenager's car had hit me. His parents forced him to write me a whole apology letter, and I still have it to this day. I hear that he's been working his ass off at a grocery store just to use the car that belonged to his dad. I think that this was well deserved for him. What do you think? Well, there was this one time he pranked a pregnant woman by trying to prove that all pregnant women like to eat pickles with ice cream. His friends filmed Jack in a mall, handing out fake samples of food. He had hidden the pickle slice inside the scoop of ice cream and given it to the poor pregnant lady. She ended up having a severe allergic reaction, and instead of helping her, Jack and his douchey friends ran out of the mall. I'm Luna, and I'm a college student. I'm here to talk about my crazy brother and his friends, who made one of the dumbest mistakes of their lives. I'll tell you everything that happened. My brother Jack is a middle schooler. He's 14, and he's always been a jokester. Ever since he discovered prank channels on YouTube, I've been a victim of his lunacy more than enough times, and you wouldn't believe the amount of relief I felt when I finally left home for college. However, as odd as it sounds, I began to miss his practical jokes after a while since I was quite lonely at college. And besides, he was my little brother. So a few months ago, Jack had told me that he was going to start a YouTube channel so that he could become rich and famous like everyone else. I was happy for him, since he was pursuing a dream of his. The conversation didn't go the way I thought that it would, though, and here's how it all went down.
I'm gonna start a YouTube channel and get my friends together as a crew.
Hey, that does sound like you guys will have a lot of fun.
Oh, we will. I'm gonna get so rich and famous from these pranks.
You're pranking people for YouTube videos?
Yup,
Okay, be careful. You know most pranks are staged, right?
exactly. I'm gonna make mine authentic.
Right? What? Hey, don't hurt people now, all right?
Whatever. Bye.
Oh, bye, I guess. Now, of course, I was quite concerned about what Jack had meant when he said that he was going to make authentic prank content. Was he going to target his friends and family? Or would it be strangers? I was also worried about the extent that my brother would take his pranks because some of the ones he pulled on me over the years actually hurt me, both emotionally and physically. I didn't really think about Jack and his dream career for a while after he'd told me. My life went on normally, with hard college papers and doing late-night projects at the local library. Well, there was this one time he pranked a pregnant woman by trying to prove that all pregnant women like to eat pickles with ice cream. His friends filmed Jack in a mall, handing out fake samples of food. He had hidden the pickle slice inside the scoop of ice cream and given it to the poor pregnant lady. She ended up having a severe allergic reaction, and instead of helping her, Jack and his douchey friends ran out of the mall. I watched the video on their channel and I could see that many people were angry. It was very clear that if he kept doing stupid things like that he was going to get himself in serious trouble. I knew that someone needed to talk some sense into him, so I called him up on the phone and scolded him for being so dumb. But it was very clear that he didn't care at all. I had later also found a social media post where the family of the lady started a fundraiser to help her. They were very clearly upset that the situation occurred. Once I saw that, I sent the post to my mom, who punished Jack, but of course it was barely more than a mild punishment since he was the youngest. Honestly though, I could care less about what Jack did since I lived away from home, and it wasn't really like I could do anything to stop him. Soon enough, it was nearing the end of the school year when I got an alert from an app that someone had broken into my family's home. My eyes widened as I thought my family was in danger. I quickly looked at the home camera and was very surprised to see a bunch of police officers storming into the house with weapons drawn. It makes a little more sense now. Why would someone break into the home during the daytime? But also, what in the hell were they looking for? I called both my parents and they were at work. Both were aware that police were in the house and they told me to go and make sure it wasn't anything serious. I agreed. I left my class early and started the 2-hour drive home. When I got to the house, I was very surprised to see Jack and his friends sitting on the grass. There were at least 8 police cars surrounding my house, and I quickly got out to see what exactly was happening. However, as I began to approach the house, there were police officers everywhere and they screamed at me and pointed their guns. I was terrified for my life, so I quickly put my hands into the air. I had no idea what was going on, but I could see that it was utter chaos. What are you doing?
You are under arrest for the kidnappings of 5 children. You're going to prison for a long, long
That's my brother. He's not hurt.
time. This will only be used against you in court. You can keep talking, or you can stay quiet.
Hurt. The police grabbed me and pinned my face to the ground, handcuffing me. It honestly hurt, and I wasn't trying to struggle, but the way they were handling me hurt quite a bit, and my body reflexively moved. They saw this as resisting and tasered me, which felt horrid. Then they shoved me into the back of their car, and I was in absolute disbelief. I don't know how much time had passed, but soon my jackass brother and his friends were put in an ambulance and taken to the hospital to get checked on. I saw the face of Jack before he was ushered in, and I knew that he knew this had gone too far. Sadly, it took the police several hours before they realized that this had all been just a very elaborate prank, but thankfully they did, before I had an official criminal record. I was sitting miserably in the cell that the police officers had painfully shoved me in when the door opened, and my parents were there along with one officer. I quickly ran out and hugged my mom with tears staining my face. As it turned out, my mom showed up very soon after I was taken away. And once they were able to figure out what had happened, they quickly began setting the police straight and doing their best to get me out of jail. My mom came to the police station while my father kept trying to speak with the police that were investigating the house. My mom held my hand as we walked to the interrogation room, and Jack and his friends were sitting around laughing. When she saw their smug expressions, my mom snapped at them and started screaming. The boys started looking very nervous, and an investigator entered the room. Mom and I left the police to do their thing. We were shown the recording on my brother's camera, and my mom was very shocked when she saw the footage. I had never expected that he would do something this extreme. It was an uncut video since everything had just happened today, and there'd be no time for the boys to edit it. We sat and watched every clip. Everything started with the boys covering themselves in dirt to appear dirty. Then they went inside, and 2 of the boys were tied up by Jack. At this point, they had set up the camera in a random plant. The other 2 disappeared into the master bedroom. I watched in horror as Jack took out a large kitchen knife, and I flinched hard when I saw him slit his cheek. My horrible brother wiped the blood from his face and also smothered it all over his shirt. He started explaining that, to make the prank more realistic, he needed to make a sacrifice. So he also began to smash items around the home, including several fragile collectibles that my mother had inherited from her own grandmother. They were one-of-a-kind pieces that could never be replaced. Jack then started crawling across the floor until he finally reached our home phone. At this point, I'd assumed that the boys were already starting their prank. Jack started gasping and crying into the phone, with the police on the other end of the call. The officer that was showing us the tape fast-forwarded to the point where the police began to break into our home. There were so many of them, and they were ushering the kids out while running in and out of the room with guns. When the whole video ended, my mom's face was drenched with tears. She looked utterly embarrassed about Jack, and I was too. I wanted nothing more than to just punch the kid in the face for his stupidity. My mom and I sat there until my dad arrived. It was almost 1:30 a.m., and we were all feeling very exhausted and drained, and I wanted nothing more than to just go home. My mom took me home, and Dad stayed behind at the station to wait until the boys were done. I later found out that each kid was getting fined a heavy sum of money for wasting police resources and time. They were also charged with a misdemeanor. They even had to appear in front of a judge who demanded that they delete their YouTube channel. On top of that, they were ordered to not create a new one, and if they did, then they would be sentenced to spend the rest of their teenage years in juvenile hall. In the meantime, they would need to serve over 1,000 hours of community service each. However, that wasn't the worst of it, though. The woman that he had hurt with his pickle prank figured out who he was and sued him for pain and suffering on top of the medical bills that she accrued because of the allergic reaction. Of course, Jack had almost no money to his name, and so my parents and the woman came to an arrangement where Jack would pay off her bills over the course of many years. He would be forced to work 2 part-times for the next 10 years in order to pay for all of it. That, coupled with his community service, meant that Jack wouldn't have any free time to do anything other than work, community service, and school. For the next decade, he was going to be the most miserable and tired kid in the whole world. And it made me smile knowing that he would face what I considered to be an acceptable level of punishment. But what do you think? Let me know, and thank you for listening.